Hello everybody and welcome to this week's webinar, which is entitled Excel Hacks to Boost Accuracy and Productivity. Today I'm joined by Todd Brannon. It's the first time Todd has done a webinar or a live class with me. Todd has been an analyst in healthcare supply chain solutions since 2009. Since humble beginnings as a fledgling analyst, navigating a major career change, Todd's built his Excel skill and expertise to a level that's seen him ghostwrite for Excel blogs, including doing some work with ourselves, and he's even become a featured writer at a blog about VBA development. So I've seen some of these shortcuts, and they're fantastic. I went through them with Todd, and I just think they'll be hugely helpful for everybody listening here. So yeah, I suppose that's a good advertisement for him, really. So without further ado, I think I'll introduce Todd to you. As usual, if anybody has any questions, just pop them in the questions box and we'll get to them as and where we can. If anything can't be answered during the webinar, I'll try to get back to anybody by email. Okay, so thanks very much, everybody, and I shall speak to you at the end. So welcome, Todd.
Thank you very much, James. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. Like James said, I've only been using Excel since about 2009. Before that, I wasn't even in a desk job, so I wasn't sitting at a desk, much less a computer. So I've built my skills over the last 7 years, and even like he alluded to, even up to VBA development. So one of the things that has been had the highest impact on me is working with people along the way that have shown me some of these shortcuts. And I didn't pick them all up at once. It was over the course of the last 7 years. And one of the directors I worked for at one time probably had the biggest impact on me, teaching me some of these tips and tricks, and really kind of pressing home the idea that these little tricks don't seem like much on their own, but when you aggregate them as you're working along through your day or through your projects, every little second that they can shave off your time means a lot. And that's a big deal. Say, a process that might take you an hour, if you can shave it down to 15 minutes or a half an hour, you just added a half hour or 45 minutes to your day. And that's really high impact when it comes to business, because now you've got 30 minutes, 45 extra minutes to spend on other income or business generating activities that you weren't before. One of the biggest things that he once told me was, it's not what you don't know, it's what you don't know that you don't know. And I've never forgotten that. And a lot of times, depending on who you work with, you may be working alone in Excel on maybe you own a business, own a small business yourself, or maybe you work with a team of people that challenge you and you've seen some of these shortcuts and you've picked them up. Maybe, like me, early on, you worked with a team of a lot of new people to business and new to using Excel and didn't have really a lot of advanced skills, so you were kind of stuck in that rut of not knowing all these skills until you got around other colleagues that were able to show you some better ways to do things. So you all may be at different levels, but I've got a little scenario here that I've kind of mapped out to kind of keep things scenario based, that maybe you can sink your teeth in rather than just showing you some tricks just for the sake of the tricks. What I've got here is some data. It's just a little data table, and we'll just call it, some employee data. And say you've got this from, your manager or from a client or, just from a colleague. Say, hey, I've got this data. I need you to do a couple of things. I need you to add a row or a column to number each one of these rows. And I need you to add an email column. So I want you to create new emails or email addresses for each one of these employees. And that's kind of the gist of where we're going to go and kind of map this out. But in the process, I'm going to show you some things that should help you navigate and maybe learn some new things about how to do what you do in Excel and to better navigate your spreadsheet. So first things first, what I want to cover is some keyboard shortcuts for navigating around your data, navigating around your spreadsheets. It's easy to use the mouse. It's kind of natural. I can go from, the top cell here, A1. I'll probably refer to this as home at times. So if you hear me say home, I just mean cell A1. And while this is not a big data set, just consider translating this to a data set that has maybe hundreds or thousands of rows and even hundreds of columns. I've worked with some data sets that, I get into columns that are all the way over here into the double digits, so to speak. But we'll keep it simple just so you can kind of see the concepts. But if you imagine as we go along bigger data sets, you can really get a sense of the impact of this. So first things first, what we want to do is talk about how to navigate around without your hands leaving the keyboard. Some of you may already know a little bit about this, but you can use your arrow keys, obviously, just to move around cell to cell. Then if you, on your keyboard, if you have a home key, if you hold Control down and hit your home, you'll always go back to the top cell of your spreadsheet or A1. And so that can be very useful if you find yourself way deep in the spreadsheet, like on cell IV65536. All I need to do is hit Control Home and I'm back to A1. The next thing is just like you can move cell by cell with your arrow keys, if you add in using the Control key, if you hold down Control and hit down, it will navigate you to the bottom of your used range of data. And the same is true for navigating over to the right from where you're at. So I'm at cell A11. If I hit Control or hold Control down and hit the right arrow, it's going to take me over to the end of my data, the last column. The last column of used data. And then Control up will take me to the top, and then Control left gets me back to A1. So if I were on cell B1, the header for department, and I hit Control down, it's going to take me to the bottom of that used data. Now, for any reason I had some incomplete data, I'll delete some of that data. I'll go back to cell B1, and I'll hit Control down. I'm sorry, left key. Hit Control down. It'll take me down just as far as I have data. So keep that in mind. Again, it's just going to navigate you down to the bottom of the range that contains actual data. And if I were to go from there, Control down, it's going to take me down to the last row of my spreadsheet. But all I have to do is hit Control up, takes me back to the first used cell within that column, and then I can get back to the top of hitting Control up once again. So I'll just hit Control Z. And that's a real quick, let me do a real quick aside. If you're not aware of that keyboard shortcut, instead of using the undo button up here, you can see Excel actually shows you the keyboard shortcut for that. It's Control Z. So I'll be using that quite a bit going back and forth, but if you don't know that keyboard shortcut, there you go. So now we've seen that we can use Control down, Control right, all the arrow keys to navigate to the end of the used range data. And that's true for wherever you start. So if I start on row 5 here, I can hit Control down. It's going to take me to the same place. Now, what if you wanted to highlight that entire column of data in A? You can now press Control, then Shift at the same time, and then hit down. It will highlight the entire range. So if you need to do something like copy that range, which we'll do here in a little bit, or something like that, you can you don't have to go to the mouse. You can keep your both hands on the keyboard. And in fact, if you did a Control down, say you wanted to start at the bottom of the range, Control Shift up does the same thing. And then the same is true for highlighting the row used data. So if I wanted to highlight my row of headers, just Control Shift right key, and there you go. So if you wanted to highlight, say, the first 2 rows or the first 2 columns, now I can hit Control Shift or Control actually shift. Let me go to that. So now you've learned how to use Control Shift and the arrow keys to highlight. I can actually use Shift, or to highlight an entire range. I can use Shift alone with the arrow keys to highlight one at a time. So whereas Control Shift to the right would immediately highlight that entire row of contiguous data, I can use just Shift if I want to go one at a time. And you can do it both ways. So if we started with column E on the first row, if I hold Shift down and go to the left, I can highlight that way. And again, the same is true. If I hold Shift and go down, I can highlight one at a time. So if I wanted to just highlight the first 2 columns of data, Shift over, and then Control Shift down gets me the entire, those entire 2 columns of data. And so what if I'm down at the bottom of my data for column A, and I want to highlight all the data in column A except for the header? I can do a Control Shift up, highlight the entire column, and then if I hold Shift and hit the down arrow, it'll now reduce that range 1 cell down, and now I just have the column of data excluding the header. So again, we can do that on higher column. We can do Control down to get to the bottom of the range, Control Shift up, and then Shift down, and now I've highlighted the range if I want to, for instance, copy, if I needed to copy that data and paste it, but I don't need the header. And that, yeah, that gets us through kind of the basics of navigating with keyboard cuts. Again, it's like Control using the arrows gets you to the ends of your ranges. Let's see, Shift actually will highlight a range starting at the cell that you had activated one at a time. Control Shift highlights the entire range down to the end of the data. And then again, if I hold Shift down and hit the right key, it's going to be that same concept, or I can highlight the entire range. So real quick, I'm at cell A1, Control down, Control Shift right. I've now highlighted the entire range of data. And then again, you want to exclude that top row or your header row, Shift. Actually, what I need to do is start from the bottom. So it'd be Control Shift up, Control Shift right, Shift down. Now I've highlighted the entire range of data, excluding the header row. So that's the basics of kind of get us started navigating around, not using your mouse, just like I just did. It's a hard habit to break. And this is a really cool kind of foundation. If you start to do this, you'll find it becoming second nature at first. If you're not used to doing it, it can be a little bit awkward. But once you begin to do it and you start to notice you're not using the mouse as much, it's amazing how much time you can shave off your work as you navigate through your spreadsheets or navigate through your data on your worksheet. So say the next task we need to do is we want to add a column to the beginning of our data here, add a new column that numbers each record or each row. So we want each employee record to have its own number. So the next keyboard shortcut to get you started with this will be to highlight the entire row or entire column on the worksheet, not just the data. So many of you may know how to add a new column. You can easily click on the A here with your mouse, and you highlight the entire column, excuse me. And then you can go to the cells group here on the Home tab, and you go to Insert. The Insert drop-down shows you here you can insert a column. No problem, right? But there is a way to do this without your hands ever leaving the keyboard. So if I've highlighted cell A, Control space bar is the keyboard shortcut to highlight that entire column. So once you do that, now the keyboard shortcut to add a column is simply Control plus. So imagine that you've now done something that you did with the mouse. You had to highlight this column, go over here, insert sheet columns. No big deal, right? But it's pretty simple to hit Control space bar and then Control plus, and you've done the same thing in a matter of, I don't know, milliseconds. And you can do the same thing with row, but the keyboard shortcut to highlight the entire row is Shift space bar. That's the only difference. So it's Control space bar to highlight the entire column. It's Shift space bar to highlight the entire row. And it's the same keyboard shortcut to add a row. I just hit Control plus, and I can add rows to my heart's content. Continue to hold down Control and hit plus. And of course, if maybe I want to just add one row, or I didn't want to add any rows, somebody came to my desk, distracted me, and my hands just pressed a bunch of buttons, I can easily go here, the keyboard shortcuts, and now I've highlighted all those rows just in column A. But if I hit Shift space bar, I can highlight all those rows. Control minus is what deletes the row. So where Control plus is the keyboard shortcut to insert a new row, Control minus deletes the row. So back to what we were doing. Let's Control space bar, highlight column A, Control plus. Now I have a column so I can add my number column. So I'll just type in number, and then we'll go from there. So now I'm in cell A2, and I want to start numbering all of these rows. Now I can do this manually, and of course we only have 10 records, but imagine if you had hundreds or thousands of rows. You're not going to want to hit 1, 2, arrow 3. You can make some mistakes along the way, and there you go. You've got a big mess. The easiest way to do this is just to start your numbering here. We'll start with 1, and then we'll do number 2, and then we'll highlight both of these. And this little square in the bottom right corner of your highlighted range is called the fill handle. And you're ready to use it once your cursor becomes that plus. You can do 2 things here, or do it 2 ways. You can left click with your mouse, hold and drag that down, and if you look really closely, you can see to the right of that range as it expands, Excel is showing you a new number as you go down each cell. It's showing you where you're at. So if you needed to number 15 rows, you can stop there. But we're only going to number all of these, and we can see that this is going to be 10. And it will sequentially number those for you so long as you have the first 2 numbers set. Otherwise, if I just took one and I did the same thing, you can see that it's already showing you all those are going to be number 1, and that's not what we want. The other way that you can do this is actually faster. So long as you have contiguous data all the way down your rows, is just double click when you see that plus sign on the fill handle, and it'll automatically just fill all those numbers down sequentially to the bottom of your data, adjacent to that column. Now, one thing to be aware of, if you didn't have contiguous data and there's a gap in the adjacent data, if you do that, it's going to stop where there's a gap in that data. So just be mindful of that. That double click only works so long as your data is contiguous all the way down. There's no gaps in the rows. So I can take that from 5 and 6 because that's two sequential numbers. It'll automatically keep counting. So that's the basic gist of numbering rows. You can actually do that across columns as well. I'll show you down here. So 1, 2, it's the same concept. You have the fill handle there, and if you just keep going, it'll number sequentially for you. And in fact, this is a little bonus. I think this will work. I'm going off script here. I hope I don't pay for it. So you can see what Excel does when you go from 1 to 5, you're adding 4. It'll continue to add 4. So if you needed to do something like every other number, say odd numbers. Oh, gosh. All I had to do is 1, 1, and 3, but if you want to do 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, there you go. So just taking the logic of the first two in your sequence and just kind of continuing that on. So I just thought of that. I thought that might be a little bonus if you hadn't already kind of figured that out or assumed that was the case. So anyway, now you know how to add a number column, how to sequentially number your records. It's pretty simple stuff, but it can be very powerful. Obviously, if you had hundreds of, thousands of rows, rows of data, you're not. I mean, even if you use the fill handle to drag it down, that's not really saving you much time. So long again, if you have contiguous data, rows of data, and there's no gaps, you can just continue that. Double click that, and you're done. So the next thing, let's format our headers. Now I could easily just highlight the whole row, and if I wanted to add a filler, I could do that. But say we had just this one header highlighted. I just want to, maybe it's bold and the rest of them aren't. And by the way, the keyboard shortcut to bold is just Control B. And in fact, up here, it'll show you the keyboard shortcuts a lot of times here on the toolbar. And Control italic is Control I. So let's say I have this one column header formatted a different way than the rest of them. Oops. Say it's centered and it's bolded and the rest of them aren't. An easy way to format other cells, like a cell that you have formatted and you want to change it to, is to use the format painter. And so if I have this cell highlighted or selected, I can go to the format painter and notice when I activate it, the dancing ants around the around cell A1. So it's basically, you're basically copying cell A1, but when you use the format painter, it's just basically pasting the formatting. It's not going to paste the actual content of the cell. So I've got that selected, and the format painter is activated, and I know that by the dancing ants around the cell. Plus, your cursor gets this little paintbrush next to it, and so you know the format painter is engaged. And as long as you click into the cell that you want formatted, it'll automatically transfer that formatting to that new cell. And you can actually do the entire row if you just left click and hold down and drag that. Now you've reformatted your entire row of headers. One thing, one special note about using Format Painter is that a lot of times, and for a long time, I didn't even know I could do this, I would use the Format Painter to want to format some cells that weren't like a continuous row. So if I wanted to, reformat that cell, but I wanted to go over here, I thought, well, I've got to click this again, and this just isn't really very efficient. So one of the things that you can do is you can actually double-click Format Painter, and it will actually stay engaged. So if I hit that, you notice the paintbrush stays engaged. I can move around different non-contiguous cells. And if I click it again, it just disengages it. So that's actually something I only learned probably in the last year. And it's very helpful because if you're trying to format cells that aren't in one contiguous range, which can often be the case, it's really a pain to go back and forth. It doesn't seem very efficient. So now that we have our headers formatted, let's move on to the next step. We need to add another column because we need to add an email column. So I'm going to do that in between the name column and the department column. So let me go to home. I can go over to the department and control space bar, and I highlight that entire row. Now I'll do control plus, and I've got a new column. So I'll go up here and I'll name that. And notice if you insert a column within the table, it'll add that column, and it'll maintain the formatting for that table. So that's kind of nice. So for this, I'm going to get into using a formula, and I don't know, I'm sure many of you use formulas. Maybe you've never used a formula. This is real simple. To start a formula, you just hit equals. And what I need to do is I just need to concatenate the content of the name column on this row, because I want to add everybody's first name to a domain for an email address. And I'll just use @example.com for our purposes. So I want to concatenate the text string in cell B2 with a literal string, which will be @example.com. And so all I need to do here, first of all, is I can actually type B2 in, or I can click into it. And then in order to join this with a literal text or a cell reference that has text, we'll use the ampersand. There is actually a concatenate function in Excel, but we'll just stick with this simple kind of basic concatenation formula since we're only going to join two text strings. And so now I'm going to put my literal string in, and I have to start it with a double quote. And so it's just going to be @example.com. And I want to close that double quote. And so what this is going to do is it's going to turn out to be the content of cell B2, which is Todd. And then it's going to join that with the literal text string @example.com. So I hit enter. And I need to expand this out a little bit so you can see it. And so there you have it. But if I wanted to go a step further, and this is kind of a bonus, and get a little more complex, but it's pretty simple. If I wanted to go a step forward and say, well, I don't want all these first names to be capitalized. I want to go with kind of the general idea, the naming convention for email addresses, and I want that to be lowercase. I want the T to be lowercase. I want the first letter of everybody's name to be lowercase. There's a function in Excel called lower, conveniently enough, that if I add that, and you can see here where it shows up as one of the functions, the built-in functions to Excel. If I hit lower and just hit tab, it'll open the parentheses for me. And you noticed how it capitalized lower. All the functions in Excel are capitalized. You don't have to actually type it in capitalized if it's there. Once you hit enter or tab like this, it'll automatically do that for you. Then I need to go over here and make sure I close the parentheses, because I'm imposing this lower function on the content of cell B2, which is the Todd. And so what the lower function does, all it does is it changes everything in the string to lowercase. And if I add that and I click enter now, you can see now we have a nice little email address with lowercase on the first letter. Now all I have to do in order to expand this to all the rows of data is I can take that fill handle And just like we did with numbers, if I double click, it'll automatically copy all those down. And in fact, if you go cell by cell, you can see where I've got B2 here, it changes to B3, B4, B5 accordingly. And if you even double click in there, you can see that the content of cell B5 is highlighted there. So that's, excuse me, pretty simple. That's kind of more complicated than we've been up to this point, but just kind of an introduction to formulas. If you've never used formulas, maybe you have. It's just kind of one of those little things I thought it'd be a great exposure to joining text data for anybody who doesn't have a lot of experience doing that. So let's say you wanted to transfer this, or say you wanted to, yeah, let's transfer this. So you've got a dynamic set of data here that you are in charge of. And say you wanted to send this back over to whoever, the stakeholder or whoever requested it, but you didn't really want to send it with the formulas there. But you wanted to maintain those yourself in case you add more rows of data to this spreadsheet. So let's open a new workbook, because we want to copy and paste this same record to another workbook that'll maintain a static copy. So the keyboard shortcut to open a new workbook actually is Control-N. That's all you have to do. You don't have to go to File, Open, any of that. So that's all I just did was Control-N. And in fact, I don't have to go down here and toggle between worksheets using my mouse. There's also a keyboard shortcut for that. If you do Control-Tab, it will actually toggle you back and forth between your open workbooks. And I have to say, this is probably one of the most profound keyboard shortcuts in my career, because I used to work in a role where I would have to have about, sometimes 5, 6 workbooks opened at the same time that I would have to cycle through in order to pull data into the main workbook. And doing it the long way using the mouse was just so confusing, actually very cumbersome and very prone to error. When I could just keep my hands on the keyboard and cycle through with Control-Tab, it changed my life. So now that you know how to do that, you know how to open a new workbook using the keyboard shortcut, you know how to toggle back and forth, now let's do some copying and pasting. So I'm sure a lot of you know Control-C to copy. That's probably one of the most basic keyboard shortcuts many people know, because it kind of transcends just Excel. I mean, you can do that with text data in Word and basically anywhere else. But since you know your keyboard shortcuts, we can do a Control. We're going to take this entire table. So Control-Shift down, Control-Shift right. And then we'll do Control-C, and we know we've now copied this table of data because we can see the dancing ants around our range. So Control-Tab takes us to the new workbook, and we're already in cell A1. And we could easily just do Control-V. No big deal. And it's not a bad deal. That's copied everything just the way we had it in our original workbook. However, it's not, our columns are not fitted right. So real quick, let's fix that. So Control-Shift to the right to highlight the entire row of headers, and then we'll do Control-Space to highlight those entire columns. And if you go up here, as long as your data is highlighted all the way across all the columns that you need, you can go up in between any of these columns here. And on that line, once you get that double arrow, if you double click, it will auto fit all of the columns according to the width of data in each column. So you don't have to do each of them individually. Now, if you wanted to if you wanted to set the width of your columns uniformly, you can actually, while those columns are highlighted, you can go back to the double arrow between any of these columns, and you can make that adjustment like this. If you left click and hold that down, and once you do, it's now going to fit those columns to the same width that you just chose. So depending on your needs, depending on your preferences, those are two pretty big tricks that not a lot of people know. Right? This is not completely intuitive. I'm going to double click, go back to auto fit because I like it that way. And then I want this new workbook to be my static copy that I send out to the stakeholders. So when they click into this email cell, they don't see a formula. They see the actual text, the actual value. So in order to do that, I can highlight this entire column of data, and then I can hit Control-C, and I can copy that. Now, I can easily click on the first cell of data, I can right-click, and I can go down to Paste Options and find values. And I can do that, and now you can see that all of the formulas are gone. We've got nothing but static email addresses. But we can go a step further, and in fact, I just recently learned this, and it's really cool. I've been trying to incorporate this new keyboard shortcut because I've been just kind of going with this option all along if I wanted to paste values. So Control-C, and then back up. I can do Control-Alt-V, and the Paste Special dialog will now open for you. And if you notice under the Paste section, all those options with the radio button have a letter underlined. And it's usually the first letter until you have options that begin with the same letter. Microsoft had to go to a different option for formats because F was already taken for formulas. But any of those underlined letters, you can just press. If I want to paste values, I just type V. So again, my hands aren't leaving the keyboard. And I don't have to click OK either. I can just hit Enter, and we're done. So again, we've copied this. We've gone to the first cell that we want to paste it to. Control-Alt-V, V, and Enter. And your hands never leave the keyboard. So now that we've got this static table, you've got your everything as a value. You don't have to worry about sending this off with formulas. So if somebody clicks into the cell and they get confused or whatever, they can just see that that's just the email address they need. So one other thing that is I haven't covered just yet is one of kind of my there's a couple of things that I do every time I open up some data, and I work with a lot of data. I mean, most people work with data with headers. So I work with a lot of data that exports out of database query software. And so the first thing I like to do is to, number one, make sure my top row of headers is frozen so that as I scroll down the rows of data, I can always see the header. And then I like to activate filters on all my headers. So the first thing I do is I'll highlight the entire row, the top row, because it has my headers. And then I go to the View tab, and in this Windows section, at least in Excel 2016, I think that's probably the same, or I know it's on the View tab. I don't know if they've changed the arrangement on since 2013, 2010. I don't think they have. But if you go to Freeze Panes and drop down that arrow, you can select Freeze Top Row. And you notice as I scroll down now, that top row never moves. So imagine if you had, far more than 10 records, 10 rows of data. You can continue to scroll down, and you know what your column headers are. I mean, this data set, it's pretty obvious, but I'm sure many of you work with data sets. A lot of times there's a little bit of redundancy. I know that I work with the data. I'm in supply chain, so I work with some data that, I might have a column there that's manufacturer, and then I might have a column somewhere else in the data that's a distributor. And a lot of times there's crossover. Some manufacturers are also distributors. So you can imagine if I didn't have my top top row of headers highlighted, I'd be back and forth. And if you've got thousands of rows of data, that just such a waste of time to do that. This is such an easy thing to do, and it can really, it can really be very helpful and save you a lot of time. So if you've got, data sets that, with just looking at the data itself, you're like, what is this again? As long as you have your headers there, no matter where you're at, what row you're on in your data, it's hugely helpful. And so what I also do is I want to set filters. And the keyboard shortcut for that is Control-Shift-L. And then if you hit Control-Shift-L again, it will inactivate those filters if you wanted to remove them. Control-Shift-L. And if I want to be able to filter, on department, I want to filter out everybody that's in IT. There you go. Another thing you can do, I've kind of run through the map of what I was going to show everybody. Another thing you can do as well, I don't know how many of you have done this before, but sometimes you can, this can be very helpful if you want to format your data as a table. In fact, let me go back and unfreeze that top row. Let's see here, make sure that's not frozen. Okay, so now my top row is not frozen. Formatting as a table is a really cool trick too. You got all these, Excel's got all these nice formats, colorful formats to look at. If you do that, you've got this option here that you can tell Excel, yes, my table has headers. Otherwise, it will put headers, and they'll say column 1, column 2, column 3, that kind of thing. But if you tell it you have headers, you're good to go. And in this case, if you format as a table, it automatically sets filters on your headers. And in fact, you don't have to freeze the top row, because as I scroll down, you can see what happens. Oh, it made a liar out of me. Let me try that again. Oh, there it is. I don't know why it wasn't happening before. But if you notice that as I scroll down, now the rows with the letter labels for your columns becomes your headers. I bet I have to have it highlighted. Well, I'll learn something new. There's always more to learn in Excel, no matter how much you learn. There's always more. It's one of my favorite colleagues over the years once said Excel is a monster, and I've never forgotten that. And he was what I consider a super user himself. But yeah, so you can format as tables. That's kind of a cool option if you want to do that. And in fact, using tables can be extremely useful for a lot of reasons. One one of those is that if you're using formulas, once you put in a formula in your top row of data in a column like we just did in email, it automatically fills everything down for you. So if you've never used tables or formatted your data as a table, it can be a lot of fun to work with in the sense that it adds a few little features that you don't have to do manually, like I've shown you, different options. Again, you've got the headers there available. The filters are already set. And then again, if you put in a formula, it'll automatically fill all those down in your column. And again, you can imagine how incredibly useful and how much time that can save if you're dealing with huge data sets. So really, I think that's pretty much all I had for this webinar. That's a lot of just little tips and tricks, and I tried to kind of fit it into sort of a scenario-based situation that it just kind of makes sense on why you would want to learn these tricks, kind of working through a real-life sort of sample. So at this point, I'll just throw it back over to James. I don't know, James, if you have any suggestions, anything that you can think of you wanted to kind of touch on, or if there are any questions that have come up during the webinar here that you might want to cover.
That was great. First and foremost, some really, really useful tips. There are a couple of questions, so I was hoping we could field those for now.
Sure.
So
I'll do my best.
One of the questions is from David, who says, "Thanks for these tips." Oh no, sorry, that's not the right question. Although he said thanks for the tips. This was it. Is it possible to keep row and column formatting when copying and pasting into a new sheet or workbook? This is from Kala, who does a lot of form creation in Excel, and it always seems like they have to reformat every time they copy and paste in.
Well, actually, I've never had any trouble with that so long as you Control V.
Yeah.
But there are other options. So if you did a Control V, it kept my formatting except for the column widths. But just to touch on that, let's go back and you can do the Control Alt V and you get the paste special dialog to open. You can actually, if you press T, it'll select formats to paste formats. So let me actually go back, kind of drive this home a little bit. So if I wanted to copy my table to the new workbook, and I Control Alt V. And then I just paste values. And all I've got is this bare bones data table, no formatting, no anything. If I decide, well, maybe I want the formatting, I can actually, from where I'm at, Control Alt V, and then press T to set that, engage that radio button for formats, and then enter. And then now it's going to paste my formatting. I don't know if that's exactly what they were alluding to.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, it is. It certainly seemed like that was the case to me, and I think that really, I mean, I'm a basic user. I can't claim to know anything like what you do, but I think that just from experience, it's when you try and if you're trying to keep the formatting, it's when you right click and then try and use one of the options if you don't know exactly what they are that you end up with formatting that's not working properly. I find that Control V, yeah, as you said, you don't tend to have problems if you're copying and pasting directly with the keyboard shortcuts.
Right. And like I said, I think it was Adam who mentioned the Control Alt V shortcut to me.
Yeah.
And this has actually been kind of life changing for me because again, if I want to just I've got all the options there. I've got all the paste options,
Yeah.
and then once you kind of learn those, if I want formulas, just hit F, or if I want values, hit V, and formats, all that, and then just so yeah, this is to me this is it's much easier to look at than the way I was doing it when you right click and you've
Yeah.
got all these icons, and as you go down, I mean you can see what it is, it'll tell you, but that's just not nearly as efficient as the Control Alt V, and you can see what your needs are there.
Yeah, great. Also, Chris Tomlin has just commented that for our information, and thanks, Chris, we really appreciate it. Control Alt colon copies all special values, which is a shortcut that I've never heard before and sounds like a really
Control Alt.
useful one.
Huh. So yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up now.
Yeah, yeah. So am I, and
And
I'll
I
be.
mean, that's the truth, though. It's like it's a very good point, or it highlights a point that it's really kind of based on, I guess, what your needs are, which of these shortcuts or tips are really going to have impact, and you're going to use, and actually remember, and like I'm always learning new things. I mean, just like Adam mentioning the Control Alt V the last time we spoke, that was new to me, and I'm like, well, I got to check this out, and I've got to implement this, and sure enough, I
Yeah.
do. It's very very helpful in even improving my efficiency even more.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, I'm obliged to to tell you that Adam is pretty good on Excel too, and is one of my colleagues. In fact, he's my boss, and I think he'd kill me if I didn't admit that he's excellent with Excel. So just for that bit of context, um, yeah. Let me see if there's anything else. Um, there's a couple of tips here from David, but they're kind of contextual. So I'd just like to say thanks a lot to David for those. Kala has asked if there are any VBA webinars. Well, in terms of the webinars, the way that we do them is that we do have occasional public webinars, but members are able to listen to any webinars that we have. So depending on whether or not you're a member, there may well be a VBA webinar coming up. I'll have to check. In fact, I can see in what is coming up here quite briefly. Oh, I can't. It won't let me do it. But yeah, if you're a member, keep your eyes peeled. And the same if it's public, but obviously there's less of a chance uh, in that case. We actually do have a lifetime membership offer at the moment. So if anybody's interested, please just send me an email at info@webinarsteam.com. That's info@webinarsteam.com. And you will be able to listen to any of the webinars, past, present, and future. But yeah, we also really do welcome your suggestions. So if anybody wants to pop in the question box a webinar that they'd like to listen to soon, it can be on anything. It doesn't have to be Excel related, but we also would love to hear that too. Then please go ahead. Yeah, we're about 25 past 5. So if anybody does have any questions, then that's great. Oh wow! So we've just had a couple that have come in quickly here. Is there a shortcut to print data sheet to fit a page?
um, I don't do a lot of printing. I know there's got to be.
Yeah, it seems like that
Um,
does. I tell you what, for Garbler, um, I can take responsibility for looking that up and asking my colleagues and seeing if there is a way that any of us know, and I will send you an email with the answer in the coming days. Um, Karen Resnick, what about right-clicking on the worksheet tab making? Yeah, so Karen has an alternative way of copying and pasting. I suppose that she's mentioned copying the entire worksheet and deleting the columns. That works, but if of course, if there's a way of doing it without having to go through and delete the columns, then that would be great too. So thank you very much for that. Um,
So that did remind me, actually. I showed everybody how to toggle between workbooks. There is actually a keyboard shortcut that also you can navigate through your tabs in a workbook, different worksheets, and all that is control page up and page down. So page down will take you to the next sheet, page up, as long as you have the control key pressed down, will take you to the previous worksheet.
yeah,
I actually meant to write that in my notes and I just forgot about it, and that kind of reminded me for whatever reason.
no problem. Uh, there's another question which is for me, which is from Anna Thompson, um, which is a puzzling one for me. She has recently been asking for the email address to contact for webinars, and I have received those emails and I have actually responded. So, Anna, just again, it's just info@webinarsteam.com, but I will make sure that whether it's this evening or tomorrow morning, you get a list with everything that you need in there. So thank you very much for that. Sneeter, I think, probably asked this just before it came up. Is there a shortcut to get to paste special? As we've seen, it's Control Alt V, which is a massively useful shortcut. Is this webinar available to us afterwards, Najala? Yes, it is. Just please email me on the email address I mentioned, info@webinarsteam.com, and I can supply you with the link once that has been uploaded, which should happen within a few days. Does the instructor Todd, do you use named ranges in sheets?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, oh yeah, dynamic named ranges have changed my life. I do some VBA work. Actually, I'm working on a user forum project right now that I use dynamic named ranges, and they're huge.
Yeah, great. Um, so Laura has also said, how do I access past recorded webinars? Laura, please just send an email to info@webinarsteam.com and I can direct you in the right way, right to the right place. And that's for everybody really. Just because there's a few more people asking for that, I'll just spell it out. It's info, so INFO at webinar, WEBINAR S, and then team, TEAM.com, COM. So that's the address that you need to email. A few more bits in here that I'm not sure we're going to have time for, to be honest. A lot of people interested in VBA, so we could talk about that, Todd, if you'd like to do anything on that in the future. The shortcut to toggle between tab sheets, just to repeat it, because I think that somebody didn't hear it, that was control page up and page down, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Great.
So page up is back, page down is forward throughout your worksheet tabs. As long as you have the control key pressed.
Yep. And then just a couple of really polite, grateful people saying thank you very much. So thank you to everybody else for listening. I've really enjoyed the webinar. I hope you have too. We have a members webinar coming up next. And until that point, I suppose that that'll be it. So have a nice week, everybody. I hope you enjoyed Todd. I certainly did. So thank you very much, Todd.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that point. So thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.